So welcome back to the Creating Synergy podcast. Today on the show we have a very great human by the name of Dean Rosenfield. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
Dean, you are now the CEO of Nova Systems worldwide, global, which is a defence company that employs over 850
Yeah,
people.
a little over 1,000 people.
A little over 1,000 now?
Globally.
Okay, your data on your website's a little bit off.
We're continually growing. So
Very good. So just over 1,000 people worldwide and 300 odd plus in revenue as well.
now we've improved there as well, almost $500 million in revenue.
There you go.
Yeah, consolidated figures.
Excellent. Fantastic. So that was started here in South Australia. So almost a little unicorn business that's come out of here in South Australia, which is a great story.
Yeah, it was started by Jim Wally and Pete Nikoloff. So they were our founders. So the two of them came from the test environment, flight testing.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim's got a great story about how he started that. I won't cover that today, but very courageous in terms of stepping out of Air Force as an F-18 pilot and then starting up a business from scratch. And he did that, from using his words, sort of out of love.
Yeah.
This was really, love for the business, love for defence, and love for a woman as well, who was based here in Adelaide.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's what kept him here, and he decided to grow a business from scratch.
Well, he's done very well, and we're all thankful for it because he's creating lots of jobs here in South Australia, and not only that, over the country and worldwide. But further to that, you previously were the MD of Saab Australia, President and CEO of Saab Asia Pacific, the Chief Marketing Officer of Saab Global, and for some reason at the same time with us, the MD of Saab in the UK. So it's a pretty amazing background, and further to that, started your whole career off in the military. So I would love to sort of go back and start at your earliest context and really understand who is the man that's sitting in front of us today, and what do we need to know about your earliest context to understand you more.
Well, I suppose if I start with my last role in terms of the UK, I did confuse a lot of the citizens and my colleagues in the UK, because I was actually born there, but obviously, as you can hear with my Australian accent, and the fact that I'd been in the Australian Army and sort of grew up and lived in Australia and was just there as an expat, they had no idea that I was British. So every time I met with somebody and they'd say, okay, whereabouts are you from? Obviously, they were expecting me to say Adelaide or Melbourne, Sydney. And I'd say Manchester. I got some. So
that's crazy.
I grew up I was born in England anyway. Dad was in the Merchant Navy. He took a job with a shipping line over in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
So he really, really enjoyed, working in this part of the world, and decided then there was an opportunity came up in Australia. Said to Mum, okay, why don't we give this a go? There's going to be a better life in Australia than what we have here in the UK. He was always away. And I think the promise was that he'll get a job in Australia, be home more often. It's just, travelling around the coast. Mum thought it was, probably a good idea. So they packed up myself as a 7-year-old, and my younger sister was 2, a couple of suitcases, and we hopped on a ship, and 6 weeks later we landed in Australia.
So that's it, just sell everything, pack up, leave.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it now and I could not imagine saying to my wife,
No.
okay, there's better opportunities on the other side of the world. Let's pack up the kids, a couple of suitcases and head on over. It's just incredibly brave in terms of what they did. But when I talked to my father about it, it was really about trying to create a better opportunity, a better world for my sister and I for the future.
Why a better world? I mean, the UK it's a beautiful place. It's one of the most popular tourist attractions in the world. Like, why would Australia offer a better opportunity?
And I think it probably comes down to when you say it's a beautiful place, a nice place to visit. I mean, that's the difference between visiting and living there.
Yeah.
We were living up north of England. As I said, Dad was, to get a job, he was sailing around the world basically in the Merchant Navy. Pretty tough up there. His family, not broken, but large family. Not, the opportunity for education wasn't really there. They didn't succeed. It was really, really a tough life. And so, my dad, having travelled a lot, saw a lot of countries and sort of based in those for 6 months at a time, was just enamoured with Australia and just saw the opportunity here and thought, well, looking at the weather differences between the UK and Australia as well, was thinking that, okay, this is probably a better life, a better set of opportunities. And I think it's the Australian culture and the way that very much I still think it's not there now. I don't see it, in terms of the class system. But my dad, with his upbringing, didn't see that there was a way out, that he wouldn't be able to afford, a private education for his children, and thought, well, better education system, better sense of equality in Australia, and that's what really drove him.
Yeah, amazing. So let's tell us a little bit more about your parents. I think to understand someone's earliest context, understanding who their parents were and sort of the core philosophies that they taught you early on. It sounds like your dad wasn't around as much. Did that have a big influence on you? I mean, if he was off 6 months at a time?
Yeah. It's actually, I hadn't reflected on that, but that's, if you'd ask my kids as well now, they'd probably say, well, Dad wasn't around very much.
Yeah.
Because, with my time in the army and in industry, you're always travelling. But he left home at 14 to join the Navy. So he left, didn't have a great family life with his 7 brothers and sisters, all doing it fairly tough. He decided to get out of there, join the Navy, travel the world. He enjoyed doing that, obviously. He met my wife when he was, my mother, back in Manchester. In fact, they met at a Beatles concert in Liverpool way back when.
Yeah.
And they got married. She had a good upbringing. She was well educated. She was a bookkeeper. She liked to travel. She travelled to Europe.
Yep.
So she had that sort of sense of adventure, I think. And so between the two of them, as I said, to pack up your family, move to the other side of the world, you've got to have something there, some sort of spark when it comes to adventure and challenge.
Yeah. And so what do you remember as a child? Is there anything that you look back on that makes you smile? Is there anything that you look back on that you think, yeah, that was a pivotal moment in my life that sort of shaped who I am now?
I think probably when I first started school in Australia, because you soon learn that, and I always remember this, so when you went to school, even at primary school in the UK, you had lunchtime, meals provided by the school, so lunch canteen, everything was all sit down. We went to, and again, a rough area in Manchester, shirt and tie, at school, in primary school.
Yeah.
And so I always remember at 7 years old, Mum sent me to school in quite a rough area as well, in where we settled down in Australia first off, in a shirt and tie. And she had no idea that's, the kids didn't wear that in Australia. And it was, I soon learnt to fit in after that. My first sort of scuffle in the playground at 7 about, why do you talk funny and why do you wear weird clothes, sort of thing. So you soon learn that, and playing soccer as well, that's not the way to fit in. So I think from a pivotal moment, it was really about how you actually blend into the environment and with people and make friends and adapt to a different culture. And so ditch the tie, play Aussie rules, and get rid of the accent.
Yeah, I was going to say the accent went, and that's more of a tongue thing in the sense that as a younger age, your tongue develops at a certain age. Is that how it works?
Yeah, from my understanding, it's, and I've seen this with some friends of mine, that I think it's up to the age 15, 16. If you, by the time you get to that age, if you, wherever you are, whatever accent you have, is typically the accent you'll have for the rest of your life.
Locks in almost.
Locks in. Yeah. I mean, so from my perspective, rather than a northerner accent, which I had when I first came to Australia, I adapted quickly, and being 7, then obviously I changed and became very Australian.
What does a northern accent sound like?
I think my chief people officer, Shelley Willsmore.
I do know Shelley.
That's a northern accent. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Shelley's a superstar. So I guess for me, did you make a conscious effort to change your accent, or was it just something that happened as a way of fitting in?
I don't know going back then, but I think it was, again looking back, it was just one of those things to fit in, and I stood out, not only because I wore a tie to school on the first day, but I stood out because I was pretty good on the soccer field. Yep. Obviously, I had been brought up with that, and even at that age, that was the only sport you played. So coming to Australia, we're in summer, you're playing cricket, and there was soccer, but there's Aussie rules as well. So I sort of excelled in the early years at soccer, but realised to really fit in, then I should play Aussie rules, and I really enjoyed the game as well. Obviously, I'd never seen it before.
Yeah.
It was quite odd, but I picked it up quite quickly. I like sport. I've always had that the ability, I suppose, to pick up any sport. I've played lots, whether it been racket, ball, in terms of a racket sport, tennis or squash. I've been okay there. Golf, I only picked that up when I turned 50.
Yeah.
In fact, but managed to do okay.
Yeah.
So I like
Very
sport.
Good. Yeah. Some people are just born sort of naturally athletic. Sport is a big part of my background. And we've had a lot of CEOs, a lot of senior leaders, really successful people on this show. And I commonly find that sport is always, or in some way, shape or form, 90% of the time there's a team sport of some sort in the background that has helped shape the person for who they are. The ability to play as a team translates into real life. The ability to set goals and to focus and discipline on improving skills and development and whatnot is something that's transitioned through. Do you find that has been something that's really been foundational for you, this sporting background, and have you kept it through?
Yeah. I think for me, it's the ideal of sport, besides the physical challenge, is the fact it's the best way to demonstrate teamwork and get to understand what teamwork is all about. I like long distance running. I like those sort of physical challenges as well. But again, that's very much it's an individual thing. Same with cycling. Yes, you can go out cycling, but your ability is not because of the team; it's because of yourself. Yeah. But I've really enjoyed the team sport. So I'm happy to spend time by myself. So I like more the endurance events. I've never been a sprinter. That's one thing I can't do. If you've seen the size of my legs, I don't have big legs. I don't have big muscles in those legs. But in fact, my physio described them as miracle legs. It's a miracle you can stand up on those.
Chicken legs.
The chicken legs, yeah. So, but they've managed to, on a number of ultra marathons.
So ultra marathon meaning 100 plus. Huge.
So I've done a number of those, and I like those sort of challenges. But coming back to the sporting arena in terms of the teamwork, the team sports, that's why I loved playing cricket as I grew up here, as a schoolboy, Aussie rules, and then I went into play rugby when I was before I joined the army. So in my secondary school, I went to a different school and they had rugby, and I thought, well, I'll give this a go, and found I was pretty good at it. Yeah. So I then swapped from soccer to Aussie rules to rugby. So I've always liked those team sports because it is that camaraderie that 100%. You get. Yeah. Did
you find yourself craving that camaraderie, and that's kind of why you joined the military? I mean, what sort of drove you to? What was the decision that drove you to join that and go to I think it was the Royal Military College in Duntroon? Why that over any other university?
The high school that I went to, we had school cadets. Yep. And so I was 13, so that was year 9 or Form 3, we called in Victoria. I started there, and we had this the school cadets. So I've always enjoyed bushwalking, camping, those sorts of things, and to do this on a larger scale with all your mates. At that time at school, I thought this is pretty good. Yeah. And there's a bit of discipline there. You learn to march and you learn to tie knots and do different things. So from that age, I think I started to see a structure as well. So they bring you in, you start as a first year cadet, and then there's a hierarchy. And I found that quite intriguing, more so that it was something that I looked at and I thought, well, I want to excel. I want to be the number one cadet. I want to be the head of the unit. And I suppose that was when I first started with leadership aspirations. And up until then, you play sport, you're part of a team. But then I wanted to become the captain of the team, so to speak. And that's, again, developed those leadership aspirations. I enjoyed what I did there, enjoyed being in cadets at school. And, it was a great opportunity then to do that as a profession. Yeah, brilliant.
So what happens there from there? You join the RMC and study, and
so you do 4 years. So you do your degree and you do your military training there. So the first year we had was Duntroon, and then the second year they created a tri-service college called ADFA, the Australian Defence Academy. So we had Army, Navy, Air Force all coming together for our university education and our military training as well. So it became ADFO. Then I went back to RMC. So you all go back to your
Yep.
single service college and you graduate from there.
And then from where did you go into there? So when did you actually physically join the military? And I understand that you eventually joined Special Forces. So what does that career progression look like?
So I started in 85 as a cadet, first year, graduated in 88. I graduated to Intelligence Corps. And in Intelligence Corps, typically you're more around doing analysis work, or you're providing advice to unit commanders. You're looking at the situation in terms of the adversary, what's going on.
Yep.
It can be political, it can be military advice, etc. But you tend to do that not with a large force, so you're not really leading a lot of soldiers. So I got sent to a Signals Corps regiment. So I went to Signals Corps because then you have soldiers, and I ended up with, at that stage we didn't have enough officers, I would say, in the Corps, and I picked up 2 troops. So I had 60 odd soldiers, and you become everything from a financial counsellor to a marriage counsellor, to their leader in terms of from a field perspective, what you're doing there, and you learn some, your technical expertise around communications as well. I really, really enjoyed that, had a great time, so much so that I decided to, rather than go into Intelligence Corps, and maybe this comes about my language, I had a language aptitude. And now thinking back from our earlier discussion, was probably around getting my tongue around around the accents, etc. But rather than go and do that, I then transferred to Signals Corps because I enjoyed working in the field and enjoyed working with the soldiers and leading. Did that for a couple of years, but my squadron commander was ex-SAS. So in Signals Corps, we provide a communication squadron to SAS and to commandos. It's a special warfare signal squadron, basically. So when I did my selection course, went into Special Forces, and I did counter-terrorism for 2 years, and which is completely different to what you're doing mainstream. A lot of training, a lot of preparedness all the time when it comes to those type of events, those incident sites, etc. Thankfully, during my time, there was no live event. We were just basically training for the 2 years. We never had a domestic counter-terrorist threat at that time. Well, the threat was always there, but never an incident during my time. I finished there and went back to...
Just on that, can we just tap into that? Was there anything in that time, because there's so much in regards to learning, and I'm hearing the linkage back to you running ultra marathons to being in the Special Forces. There's this... you keep putting yourselves, and not to mention your career, you keep putting yourself into situations which are uncomfortable and really, really tough. Is there not? But the one thing that you said in that, in your statement just then, was around I learnt communications, and that was something that popped into my head. To actually lead, communicating is one of the most important aspects. What did you learn specifically around communications that you think has held you in good stead?
I think the big thing is keeping people informed. So and recognising that you don't have all the answers, and the best way to actually achieve the best outcome is to actually gather that information. And there's a lot of expertise and advice that you get from your soldiers. You'll make a decision, they don't always agree with you, and they'll give you feedback, which is almost instantaneous. Usually verbal. Why the hell are we doing this, boss? That sort of thing.
And not in those words either.
No, exactly. Very colourful language. But effectively, you're looking at trying to bring out the best in people, and the best way the best advice you're going to get is to actually share a problem. So it's really about sharing that this is where we are right now, this is the current situation, this is what we need to do, this is what I'm thinking, what do you guys think, are there any other alternatives? You evaluate those alternatives, you choose something, you select something, and then people understand, because again it's that reinforcement of the message, which is, okay, we all had input to this is what I've decided. And that's the difference, I think, when you're an officer, or as a leader, ultimately somebody has to take the decision, and you might have numerous inputs, numerous feedback options, but ultimately you have to take a decision. And so then you take the decision, but again, you don't just say, okay, this is what we're doing. You then communicate that again, which is to explain, okay, we went through this is what we've chosen, and don't assume that everybody was involved in that and understands exactly that particular option. So you communicate, and then you go and you execute on that.
So communicate again.
Absolutely.
When you make those decisions, now, in the corporate world, making a decision means potentially revenue or growth versus a decision in special forces, which might mean life or death, right? And I know you said that you weren't in an alive event in these situations, but how are you trained to make those decisions with so much on the line?
I think a lot of it comes down, we do a lot of training. So you run through a lot of scenarios and you, particularly even when you first start as an officer, junior officer under training, you want certain things to be instinctive. So the best way for something to be instinctive is to actually do it again and again and again and again and again. And so when it does happen, it's almost natural. Well, it is very natural in terms of your reaction. And by doing that, then it gives you more time to think because you know what you're going to do to start. You don't bang, something happens, okay, now what do I do? Bang, something happens, you go into a particular drill or a way of working, and then that gives you time to think about other issues, other things, the peripherals, anything's changing. Now what do I do? And if everyone's trained to that standard, then everyone knows what to do in the first instant. And then it gives you time to think and get ahead of what's going to happen next. And so I think, even from a corporate world, sometimes, and I reflect sometimes, I think maybe I overthink some things, but I think that's one of those, it's something I've always, not necessarily been, maybe I have been trained to do that, but it's become natural to me, which is I think about things over and over and over, about, okay, we want to go down a particular route. If we do an acquisition of another company, what have we got to go through? What could be the outcomes? What would they say? How do we position? You go through it again and again and again in your own head. And so that when you do it, then you're not really going to be surprised. Well, you shouldn't be surprised.
No, you shouldn't.
So I think it's just something I've always done. And maybe I was doing it before as a kid, I don't know. But particularly in the Army, for that, the physical threats or the environmental threats, from an adversary, then it's about training. Where
do you place gut feel in all this? I think if you think about just any decision that needs to be made, and you talk about training within the confines of the Army military, let's take that into a corporate setting where I've been given all the data, I've been given all the information possible. I've seek to understand my peers and my team around me, and try to take in what they think and what they believe is the best option moving forward. And what they're putting forward to me makes sense, right? Makes real sense, and it's very logical, and there's some good outcomes. But my gut feel is telling me we need to go down this other, which is a little bit untested, a little bit untried. How do you make decisions in that situation?
It comes down to, I suppose, understanding what the risks are. What are you prepared to, or what could happen, and in terms of what could you lose if you go down a particular path. But
in the same instant, isn't there the potential opportunity?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's always the converse. There's risk and opportunity. But in my way, or my thinking anyway, you're doing something because of the opportunity. But what you need to do is you're evaluating your different options, is where are the risks and what are we prepared to take? So what's your appetite or your capacity for risk in the first place, and therefore then what's your appetite? And then you make a decision around that. Okay, I've got plenty of reserves, I've got plenty of money in the bank, okay, this is a risky move, leaving one company to join another company, or, to buy, sell this car and buy another car, if you don't do all your homework, for example. I mean, I've been quite simplistic.
Yeah.
But everything comes down to, it's always a trade-off, a risk and reward.
And how often do you find yourself wanting to go with your gut over what logically makes sense, though?
I'm a very logic-based person.
Okay.
Not really. And I think the gut instinct, I don't know if people talk about it a lot. Is it really a gut instinct, or is it something which is, learned behaviours in terms of, I've seen this happen before.
Mental models.
Yeah, exactly. And so, does that become your gut feel, which is based on experience? It's like this, do that.
Yeah.
And maybe it comes back again to my training, to get something that's instinctive. But I think, from that perspective, I have a reasonable gut level judgment on things.
Yeah.
And I think you can do that around people as well. When you meet people for the first time, that's a sort of gut feeling about, am I going to get along with this individual or not?
Can I have a beer with this person or not?
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you, so let's get back into the SAS. Is there anything that I know there's things you can talk about, and there's a lot that you probably can't. I'm just interested to hear a great story, one that sort of resonated with you in that time, that you believe, this is actually a story that is worth telling, and that there might be some learning from it. It's a pretty general question, but I don't know where I can dance on in the terms of boundaries of what I can ask you and not ask you in this sort of question.
Yeah, I think one of the best, I think the learnings from this is before you go into that environment, you're always the boss. But when you go into it, as an officer, you're only staying there for a short period of time. So soldiers will come in and they can make a career of it. They can come in as a private or as a corporal, then they go back to trooper level, and you work your way up, to regimental sergeant major or warrant officer, and they can spend their whole career in that environment. But as an officer, you go in there as a captain, you do 3 years, you're out. If you've done a good job, then you've got an opportunity to come back as a major, do that for 2 years. You go out back into a normal regiment. Then if you're, at the pinnacle, there's not that many regiments in terms of, 2 commandos and the SAS regiment, and there's a few staff jobs, and you come back as lieutenant colonel. So it's very narrow, the pyramid there. But it means that the base, particularly from the soldier, the expertise and the level and knowledge and understanding is very broad. So when you join that environment, you need to listen. You're not the expert, you're not the boss. You can have small patrols where it's the corporal, the sergeant, the warrant officer, they're the patrol leader. You're not the patrol leader as a captain. You need to learn your craft and you need to trust them. And everyone's trained, has their own area of expertise. And I had some, brilliant soldiers in that environment who were experts in what they did. And so you learn to then trust them. Yeah, you may ultimately, you're part of that team and you have to make the decision, but you rely a lot on their judgment and their expertise.
With the pyramid being that narrow at the top, obviously the person who's sitting at the top there is of great caliber. Hollywood suggests that there's the odd bad general, major, or whatever that people don't want to listen to, and then soldiers go rogue. How true is that, or is it the absolute trust in your leader is built? And because essentially you are about to go into a situation where, again, your life is on the line based on what someone else thinks.
Yeah. Oh, look, there's ultimate trust there because it's a very methodical system. Every year you're reported on, you set goals, you've set targets, you get reported on by your senior officer, and then it goes up and is checked by that person's senior as well. So this the senior reporting officer. So you go through that system. You've got the level of expertise in the base before you get to that particular point. So to be a unit commander or a brigade commander, division commander, etc., you've been through all the different elements of command. You've been tried and tested. If you've done a good job, then you get the right reports. Then you get the opportunity to go to the next level. And there's some fantastic leaders. I mean, there's incredible leaders who don't necessarily make it all the way to the top, because there's so many there. So the ones that we have, of course you have the ultimate faith and trust in their ability, because otherwise they wouldn't have been there. The system would weed them out. The system
weeds them out, yeah. That's great. It's a bit harder in the corporate world when there is a lack of resources, isn't there, really? And there's a lot of competition amongst different businesses to weed out the weaker leader.
Yeah, but I mean, that comes down to a particular company's values or its culture. And I know now from my last 5 months now at Nova that and I experienced that as well, to be honest, my previous employment as well with Saab for such a long period of time. You recruit the best people, because if you surround yourself around with the best people, then you get the best outcomes. Not only from a personal perspective, but it's more from the institutional, the organisational perspective. Yeah. So Nova is very much around picking the best and the brightest and seeking those out. And then it comes down to that employee value proposition. How do you set yourself apart from others? And the best way to do that is, through word of mouth. You recruit the best and the brightest. They're part of Nova. And then that reflects into the community and through, other customers, clients that we've had before. You build up that brand, and so only the best then want to come and join the company as well. So self-fulfilling.
Yeah, build a business that people want to work for. So what happens from there? You start. When do you start transitioning into the corporate world? And how long were you in the military?
So I was in the military for 15 years.
15 years.
So it was after I left Special Forces, I went on operations to Cambodia. So I had 6 months over there. I left when my wife was 7 months pregnant. So I came home, and my daughter was 5.5 months old.
Yeah.
By the time I got home.
How was that experience?
It was
for you.
For me.
First child or second child?
Second
child.
Yeah. So that's what made it difficult, in the fact that I'd been there for our son when he was born. Wasn't going to be there for the second one. We didn't know the sex as well when I left, so didn't know having another boy or a girl. But it's particularly hard on my wife, having a 6-year-old boy, 7 months pregnant, and the husband's going off overseas for 6 months. So it was very hard on her.
You wouldn't have been the most popular person.
But it was a decision that we took together. It's something that, this is what I joined the Army to do.
Yep.
And I've been asked to go to deploy in operations, so off you go. And I was lucky in the fact that I met my wife in my second year I was actually at ADFA, so my second year of officer training. Okay. So I was still young.
Was she in the military as well?
No, she was a Canberra girl.
Okay.
And so so we met, and we're still married now, 36 years later. So I suppose she grew with me in the military in terms of our relationship, grew along as well as the
so she understood.
Postings. Yeah. She understood, but I think we're fairly naive as well, because you don't realise the tensions that separation, does play on you. Because back then as well, this is in the mid-90s, we didn't have, the FaceTime and the internet and the ability to communicate as we do now. So, when I'd come back into the capital city, into Phnom Penh, I'd then get a opportunity to go to a phone box with the phone card and with like a telecom card, put it in, and I'd get 2 minutes to talk with my wife, and that's it, and our son, and hear the baby crying in the background, sort of thing. So that was tough on me, tough on her, particularly tough on my wife.
Did you have a name picked already, or was it something that she chose?
Well, I don't have any choice in that one anyway. Yeah. It's like, you're not here, you don't get to choose.
Yeah, okay. So
and I was fine.
You didn't have one picked prior before
not
leaving?
Really, no. Yeah. Well, we had a couple of names, but my wife chose a name, which of course I was happy with anyway.
Yeah. What was that phone call like when you rang and realised that she'd given birth? It was
amazing. It was actually they called me. So effectively, we were attached to the embassy, the Australian embassy then. It was only just a small team. We were doing training for the Cambodian Armed Forces because they were fighting the Khmer Rouge at the time. And so I was actually the duty officer for the small team. We'd always rotate to provide security for the embassy. I was a duty officer at the time, and the call came through. It was my father-in-law who called me to say, congratulations. And then he put my son on, and Josh said, Dad, I've got a sister. Yeah. So that's the first time, It was just, it's quite amazing. It was fantastic. Great feeling. Yeah. But then I came back from there, came back to Duntroon, the Army Officer College, as a company commander, looking after the training of the young cadets at the time. Then I was supposed to then go to what we call the UNSO, which is Israel, monitoring the nations around there in terms of a peacekeeping operation. But at that time, this is before Timor, Iraq, Afghanistan. Army said, you've been on operations. Somebody else needs to have a go. So I had no idea what I was going to do. And then they said to me, we're going to put you on the technical staff officers course. So a year full-time as a student, basically. Okay. So I did a master's in project management. Yeah. Then I got posted to Army Office, and I worked on a project, and that really opened my eyes up to the rest of the world. To
the corporate world.
And the corporate world. And that was it. Then I decided to leave.
Because you would have probably had more time with your family than ever in that time.
Absolutely, yeah. And I came back to Canberra, working in Canberra girl, as in my wife, and her parents were where we bought a house, literally 200 metres down the road. Yeah. So it was a perfect environment. So it's like, okay, where are we going to go next? Well, I think we'll stay in Canberra. Yeah. And it was just a really good time. I loved my time in the Army, but it was a good time to leave the Army as well.
Yeah. And so what does that look like? How do you transition and where do you go from?
I took what I call probably the easy path, which is I worked as a consultant back into defence.
Okay.
So a mate of mine was working for a company called SMS.
Yep.
We provide project management advisory services back into defence. So I worked back into Department of Defence as a civilian running a project for defence.
Yep.
So it's something that I say the soft way or the easy step out.
Yeah.
And then I started working with other companies, BAE, and then a company called Celsius Tech, now Saab. And then I stepped across to Saab, and that was back in 2001.
And so what role did you step in at Saab when you first joined there? Did you sort of start at the bottom and work your way up?
Yeah, effectively.
Because you were there for 20 odd years, weren't you?
Yeah, for almost 23 years.
Yeah.
So my first role is I was doing like anything, you got to start at the bottom, and I started on working on tenders.
Mm-hmm.
So putting in responses back to the Commonwealth.
The fun stuff, yeah.
Win or lose. We were quite successful there. Then I took over as the engineering manager for a project.
Yep.
Then a project manager, and then I moved up as sales director, general manager, ran a completely different business. We were just defence. It took us in a different path. We went into prison security from an electronic security perspective.
Because you've told me that story previously. That Saab had never played in that field, and that was sort of your brainchild. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we had a product in Sweden, which is it was based on a situation awareness or command and control for prison riot squads. So typically, how you track. Blue Force tracker, tracking your own troops and forces around the battlefield. This is in a built-up environment, in a prison environment. How do you coordinate if there's a riot in a prison? And that's what Saab were doing in Sweden. So small little part of it. I took that product, came down to Australia and said, surely there must be a market for this. This is why, there's more prisons in Australia than there are in Sweden. Must be able to sell this. Went up to Townsville Correctional Centre, or the facility up there, and it was a friend of mine who was also ex-army. He was the governor for the men's and women's prisons, and he's looked at that and said, "Mate, we don't run our prisons like that. We don't have a need for that. And what we have a need for though is some sort of command and control, a security management system." And he said, "We've got a company providing that. In fact, they provide that to all the Queensland prisons. In fact, most of the Australian prisons. So maybe there's an opportunity there." He introduced me to the group that was running that acquisition for Queensland prisons. I went and put my little spiel forward in terms of what Saab could do, what we do in the defence. So we provide what I call the brains of a battleship. In terms of, we take the sensor feed from radars, we plot there's a threat coming in, you need to fire the gun, you do that through a weapon and assignment, etc. And off we go. So the brains, coordinating all of that. And I said, well, we must be able to develop something and deliver that to the prisons. How hard can it be? With everything that we had.
Famous last words, yeah.
Famous. We were lucky in the fact that we were given the opportunity to put a bid in.
Yeah.
We did that, and we were, lo and behold, down selected. And then we were given the responsibility to put one into a prison, which is in Queensland. Our first one, and then since then, Saab's gone on to probably take half the market in Australia and New Zealand.
That's amazing.
So it was very successful.
It was great that the company saw that you had, was that what you were employed to do, was to go and find potential new business?
Yeah, effectively.
Yeah.
Because it was a diversification strategy at the time. So very much we were doing a bit around the land space, which was with the project I was running.
Yep.
And then we had a big program around the maritime area on combat management system. So it's like, well, we've got two legs of the stool, maybe we need a third to go and find something else. So I decided I'd go out, and the MD at the time, he trusted me to do so, and we gave it a go, and it was successful.
What's your advice to those who are in that same situation now, looking to innovate within company? I mean, we speak to, as you can appreciate, we do a lot of work in change and transformation, and this is one of those instances where new product line, new service offering, all the above. There are a lot of people who are going through that in their organisation right now, and sort of probably stonewalled in a way where the current culture won't allow that innovation. The risk is too great, this, that, the other. How can we empower people within organisations to think more innovatively, and how can we help leaders understand that this is something that we should be doing and looking at?
I think it comes down to making sure that they're doing it for the right reasons. It's not innovation or adventure just for the sake of it. It's actually thinking about that there is a viable business case. I mean, people talk about innovation, but something's only innovative or successful if there's actually a need. There's got to be a need, a desire or want for that particular widget or that service, and there's got to be someone who values it and someone's prepared to pay. So what I've always done when it comes to innovative proposals is to look at it and say, well, where is the market? Can it be addressed? Are there any other competitors? What makes us or our offer different? And if you've got a good business case and there's a good commercial acumen or understanding, then it's easier to get other people on board as well, to get the support of the board or the shareholders, stakeholders, etc.
Yeah. What about in the counter argument of, and especially in the world that I play in, small business, where we have become more successful by niching as opposed to doing more? How do you talk to that, where actually we should stick with what we're good at and grow that to be world class as opposed to looking in other areas?
Yeah, I think it's situational. It depends on the business cycle, the size of the company, where you are in your growth, and what your, again, coming back to very much your risk capacity and appetite is. Because there are times, if I go back to my time at Saab, one of the things I did then, I was responsible for all the markets outside of Sweden effectively. And we had, when I first took over, you could see that we were spread a little bit too thin. So there was a concentration, or there was a need to actually look at which markets are we operating in, which countries are we operating in, where can we get that return. These ones don't make sense, and we then need to focus. So you go through that focusing activity. Then as the market continues to grow and the opportunities are there, then you can expand again. So it's a bit of a concertina.
Yeah.
And the same in any business. You look at it, and it's, I think, to establish your place, or your position in the market, sometimes to get a foot in, you have to be very focused. So you get in established, as we did with the corrections market for Saab on the civil security side. You get in, you get known in that particular area, then your reputation, will precede you when you go into other areas, and then you can expand again from there. But then sometimes you might look at it, and depending on what the financial situation is, then you might need to contract and come back to that core again as well.
So you just take the opportunities where they come,
very much,
and then see how they go and see if you can grow it. And
it's opportunities, but it's got to be the real opportunities. So you've got to have that, and maybe like you said before, do I have a gut feeling? Sometimes, and I think, I don't know if it's a gut feeling or it's just, again, using that logic to look at the market to say, what's the trend? Is it going to continue to grow, or is it just a simple, it's a blip?
Yeah.
And, you might address it now thinking that there's something behind that, and it all disappears.
Yeah. You're obviously very well regarded within the world at Saab, 23 years, but then, MD of Australia, MD of UK, Chief Marketing, like all the roles that you played. What was it about Dean that the business just saw the potential in you, or saw the value that you continued to bring? What behaviours did you show up with every day? What leadership qualities did you embark on? And who was Dean when leading, and how can those listening in now learn from that type of behaviour or experience?
That's a good question. I think I suppose a little bit judgmental, but I think I've done well. I did well at Saab, and that was based on the fact that I've always had some sort of plan. I always looked about 5 years ahead. Where do I want to go? And
as an individual for the business? Well,
a bit of both, actually. Initially, it's, as an individual, where do I want to go? But the way you're going to go there as well is to take the business with you. So, creating that role as a general manager for civil security, that's, it was my personal growth. It's a challenge, and there was an opportunity there. But I could see that the business, because there was a business requirement to diversify. So I always look 5 years ahead. You don't always have to have, an exact plan. And I haven't, to be honest. I've just said, okay, in 5 years' time, in that horizon, I'd like to achieve this, either for myself or for the business. you don't know exactly how you're going to do it right there at that moment. You have a rough idea of how to get there, but there's different paths. So, I might take the high road or the low road, but ultimately I've got a point in which I'm aiming for that I want to either take myself or the business to. So it's about, and being flexible along the way, but also adjusting, because you might go down a particular path and that might be a dead end. Then you need to adjust. You can't just, try to force your way through and say, you need to adjust your focus, and you just got to be flexible.
Yeah, I love that. Focus is is the number one thing in order to be successful in anything. If you focus on 20 different things, it's hard to be successful in one. For me, I guess the question also is around the leadership behavior that you would have shown to be trusted to run different countries and Asia Pacific and then obviously globally from a marketing perspective is something that they would have seen you as a leader. And I just go back to our conversation earlier, and this is something that you said to me in our previous conversations as well, which is around, I love the leadership aspect. I loved, you said it with the sport, so to speak, where I wanted to be a leader. What, in your eyes, constitutes a great leader? What do you mark yourself on as being a successful leader and one in which, like we talked earlier, can build trust with not only your team and your reports, but the community and those around you? What encapsulates you as a leader?
I think it's around being able to bring others along, because you can do something. If you do it by yourself, then you're definitely not a leader.
Yeah.
You're an individual. But it's actually that ability to be able to explain to people and get their buy-in. So you're bringing others along on the journey. Leadership's about, exactly doing that, which is explaining why you're doing it and going back into what's in it for them as well, so that they feel that sense of commitment and responsibility for the outcome as well.
Yeah.
So it's a shared understanding of where you're going and why you're going there as well. So I think leadership is, you can't just say we're going there. You've got to explain why we're going there, and what are the benefits of going there.
Yeah.
And then when people understand that, then they want to go there, and then they're committed, along the way, and they bring others along as well.
Yeah.
So to me, ultimately, it's been able to do exactly that, communicate. You can challenge people as well at different times, but ultimately you've got to take that decision, but you've got to bring people along,
Yeah. It's one thing to bring people along, right? And what often gets missed, I believe, is the ability to create the conditions for people to flourish. And it sounds like that's something that you have just done through your leadership, is that you've been able to say, or you've been able to build the trust of those who report to you and the teams around you and the business in general. And you say, this is where we want to go. This is what we want to achieve. I've set my vision. I've set my strategy. Here we go. And everyone's on board. But it's now the buck stops with you, is also to create the conditions so that people can flourish. And that's somewhere where a lot of leaders don't actually realize that's their role as well.
Yeah.
How have you gone about setting the right conditions? What are some of the things that you like to see culturally within your organization that creates those conditions of empowerment? Because it's all well and good saying you're empowered, go do, but no one is empowered unless they've got the right conditions to work under.
Yeah. I think one of the key areas is probably feedback as well, because you can say you're empowered, but if they're doing something wrong, or something's not working,
Correct.
then you need to step in, quite quickly and say, do you think you're achieving the right outcome here? Is there a better way of doing that? Have they reflected on it?
Yeah.
And sometimes, particularly young leaders will look at it and just headlong, okay, this is what my boss has said. I have their full support. They've told me they have their support. Let's go. But at the end of the day, if they make a misstep, or something's gone wrong, then the leader needs to be there. You need to be there to support them and say, okay, where are we up to? Monitoring, and helping them manage the situation, and then they learn, And I like, a lot of people use that term, fail fast.
Yep.
We've been doing it all our life.
Yeah.
When you learn to walk,
Yeah.
you fall over,
Correct.
you fail fast. You overcome that, and before you know it, you're running. But I think it's really important for leaders to actually to provide the support and the monitoring and then the ongoing management, so junior leaders or managers can actually learn, and they can learn from their mistakes And if they've done everything well, it's still really, really important to reflect, to go, well, what worked? Why did we achieve what we set out to do? Walk back and go, we took the right decision there, right decision there, right decision there. Okay, do that again next time.
Yeah.
But then next time there'll be a change in the situation and they might fail on a particular step. As hopefully they'll reflect, again through monitoring and managing it, and learn from that and adjust with the flexibility to achieve what they need to.
Yeah, I love that. There's a famous general, I can't remember his name. You might remember when I say, he's quoted to say, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Yeah, there was the chief of army.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name now.
So the standard that you walk past is the standard you accept. What don't you accept as a leader? And what will you not be afraid to call out?
Laziness is probably one thing I don't. Yeah, and people who just look after themselves. Because as a leader, it's not about you, it's about your team. So if I see leaders who aren't looking after their team and not thinking about their team, then I step in. I give everybody the opportunity, I believe I do anyway, the opportunity to learn and to grow. But if someone is doing it for themselves and not for the sake of their team and not looking after their team, and that's when you also got to look into it as to why they're not doing it, and they might have some personal circumstances as to why they've dropped the ball, for example. But effectively, if it's down to laziness or they're just in it for themselves, then I step in.
Yeah, no doubt. As a CEO, and for the CEOs that are listening in now, for the aspiring CEOs that are looking to land a role in the near future, what do you see is the primary focus of your role? I mean, why would Anova Systems hire someone like you? And not in the sense that, what was it about Dean that they went, this is the CEO to take us into the next phase of our growth?
I think, obviously there's demonstrated results.
Yes.
But I think it really comes down to, when you look at who you choose, it's got to be someone who's got to have that cultural match. The person who has the same sort of shared values and behaviours that can then lead and inspire and then, to help grow and develop an organisation. So I think ultimately it comes down to, are they a right cultural fit? Are they going to lead? Are they doing it for the right reasons? Which is to actually grow the organisation, but, by growing people. Because ultimately every organisation, doesn't matter what you do, it's all about the people. And that's one thing I firmly hold up when people talk about balanced scorecards, and they talk about, how they're going to measure their organisation and what they do. 3 criteria I always look at is people, positioning, and then performance. If you've got the right people, and if you're in the right market and position with the right product, that sort of, from the innovation perspective, there's a market there, then the performance comes. It just flows. Yeah, it does. But if you're focused on performance, then a lot of the time you're going to miss the most important thing, which is the people. So always focus on the people first. It's
always about the people in our eyes here. I think, as you know, I run a company called SynergyIQ, who are experts in change, organisational change, and we're doing a little bit of work with Nova and Shelley and the team. But I guess for me, I'm keen to hear about your thoughts on change, especially given the change and transformation that continually happens in the defence industry, which is your background. Given that extensive experience that you've had, I'm just interested in your thoughts around the change maturity within an organisation, and what you deem to see as an effective change strategy. How do you lead through change?
Again, coming back to that, principle of leadership about the communication. It's about understanding, you've got to understand not only yourself but your organisation and how adaptive they are or flexible. And when I say adaptive, are they open to change? Because within any organisation, there are people who like change and there are those who don't like change. And it's how do you bring those who don't like change along with you? So again, communication, making sure everyone understands it's for the good of the organisation, the betterment of the company, but you don't do it just for the sake of it, and you never do anything, half-hearted. You actually have to plan it. You need to understand why you're doing it, and what are the issues that you're going to face along the way. Think about those, and again, what's your strategy for dealing with those issues as they come up.
Commit to leading through it. Yeah,
absolutely. But you still have to be flexible, because you might be going through a change process. You need to get to a certain point, stop, have a look around. What has changed? Is the context still the same? Are we still on the right path? That's why I talk about that flexibility to make sure you're still heading for the right direction. And there might be alternate paths along the way. But if you just go full bore, here's our change program, and it'll be done in 2 years, then you're doomed to failure.
Yeah.
You've got to bring people along step by step, and stop, reflect, what works, what doesn't work, where are we going next, communicate that, and take the next step as well.
Yep.
And you're going to lose people, along the way, because they don't like where we're going, or they can't understand because they want certainty.
Yep.
And that's not often there, to be honest.
Do you think that people don't like change more so than they just don't understand what's happening?
Yeah, it could be. And that's why, again, I'm always banging on about communication. It sounds like it anyway. But it's really, really important to, that you communicate as much as you can. But the communication is not, you've got to listen. When I say communication, I should have said this before.
Yeah.
It's both ways. You've got to be prepared to listen and understand, what effect you're having on that person or that organisation.
So we do a lot of work in this space. We believe that change is fundamentally something that people like. You change, like you said earlier, a new car, a new house. These are great changes. These are changes that are huge and complex, and people are liking them. If I was to put $1 million in front of you right now, I'm almost certain you would like the change. And so where we sort of really do a lot of our research in is around the art of sense making. How do we help our leaders and our organisations make sense of the change? And there's a couple of roles within that. So the role of a leader is, I need to make sense of the change that we're embarking on, and I need to help my organisation make sense of it. And that's exactly how as you said, it's through communication. But there's more than that. There is a little bit of a system in that, where what are we doing, what are we not doing, what's the actual context, return on investment, what does this mean for our people, our customer, and then down all the way through to our perspectives. What is everyone seeing and feeling and touching versus how does this interact within the ecosystem? So when we can absolutely understand how and why we're moving forward with a change, people are more likely to lean in. And I think that's where a lot of the organisations fall down, as you just said, was that if you full bore ahead, we're going with this change, we don't care what you say, because this is what we're doing, then you're more likely to go over budget, you're more likely to have engagement levels drop, you're more likely to have it turnover increase, and all these things that sort of flow on negatively from that, as opposed to spending some time actually just setting up the project for success. And similar to what we said before, which was creating the conditions for success. That is the absolute foundational piece in any change succession.
Yeah, absolutely. I think preparation is a key part of it. It's spend more time preparing for it than you do doing it.
Correct.
That's really, really important.
Well, it's the old saying: if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, what type of change have you seen in your world, particularly that? Because the defence industry is one that is big and cumbersome and slow, and there's a lot of red tape. How do you navigate that complexity with wanting to be innovative in new service lines and all this sort of stuff where, as you can probably appreciate, it's kind of contradictory in a way? Yeah.
Well, I think, the fundamentals are that we still need to stay ahead of our adversary. So technological change has always been about, the enemy has this, we need to have something better, whether it's through our tactics or our techniques or the products that we have. So we're always looking for that edge. But from a defence perspective, everything you do and you deliver, you need to spend a lot of time in that test and evaluation phase to make sure it is safe, to prove that the outcome can be achieved and you're not putting your own soldiers in harm's way, so to speak.
Yep.
But I think that's changed quite dramatically now when you talk about innovation and the speed now, if you look at Ukraine. So what we're seeing there is that, since the Russian invasion, it's about the adaptation of technology, and particularly from the commercial sense, there's the burning bridge, so to speak. We need to actually do something now. We don't have all the armaments. We can't match the enemy with the same sort of perspective in terms of armaments. So we need to be innovative, and Ukrainian forces have been incredibly innovative in terms of what we've seen with the use of drones, on the water and in the air, just incredible. And that's, if I look back, probably even 5 years ago, we were thinking about it. We were talking about the use of UAVs. We were talking about different munition types, etc. But it was always, it's coming. We'll get there in the future. We would go through a normal procurement cycle. That's changed rapidly, and everyone now has had a huge wake-up call, particularly in Europe. I mean, I saw it, living up there for the last 4 years in Europe. As soon as Ukraine was invaded, that was, that's interesting. It'll be over in, 2 months, 3 months' time. Then to see it protracted and to see the atrocities that are coming out of that, and then there's been a huge wake-up call, which is, well, nobody's stopping them. Who's next? And that's why Poland, for example, have gone to 6% of GDP is now spent on defence.
Yep.
The Baltic nations are going into there. Sweden and Finland joined NATO.
Yep.
They've always been unaligned. Were never, when I was living in Sweden, they were never ever going to join NATO. I think, the defence minister said, over my dead body sort of thing. And then sure enough, they're now a NATO member. So there's that they need to, they've adapting, and their procurement principles have now changed because of that need, that desire now to actually make sure that we can protect ourselves.
Yeah. So ultimately, the purpose of what we're trying to do is protect and become sovereign, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
We'll go into your thoughts on Australia and the sovereign nation that we are embarking on to, trying to become. And we're a ways off that in a sense, I think, from my understanding. But before we go into that, I would love to just talk to you about Nova Systems and you joining Nova Systems and deciding that the Saab career was one that came to an end. So why did you decide to jump over to the Nova team, and what ultimately was your pitch for the future growth and vision of that company?
I think I was fortunate in the fact that I'd done a lot with Saab and built up a lot of experience. Being out of the country for 6 years, and particularly during COVID, during that period, we had that separation from the family. My kids are now adults.
Yep.
They're 35 and 29, but we didn't see them during that period. My wife's father passed away. You feel that separation. So there was, the stress of being on the other side of the globe. If something goes wrong, then even if you had a tick in your hand, you're still 24 to 28 hours away from getting home if need be. And there was the opportunity there from a Nova perspective. And I knew Nova when I was the MD of Saab Australia. We were quite competitive in terms of, the way we'd address the market in regards to getting people to come and join, recruiting, etc. Took great pleasure competing against Jim Wally for awards around, who's got the best company and, best recruiting, the graduate programs, etc., etc. So I've always liked that, that healthy competition. But from that was a lot of respect around Nova and the way they go about business. I mean, Saab's a global multinational company, it's publicly traded.
Yep.
Nova is a Australian-owned and operated, privately owned and operated company. And Jim and Peter have done a fantastic job in terms of growing that business. And what I loved when I was here as the MD was about how do we make Saab Australian. So it was an Australian company with a Swedish parent.
Yeah.
So I've always been really, really big on the Australian owned and operated. Well, not necessarily owned, but at least, the operation side. But then the opportunity to come back and be the CEO of an Australian owned and operated and to grow that and to make a difference to the defence, environment here in Australia, and the potential opportunity to be the first Australian-owned prime as well. I saw that was a big opportunity for me. Too big an opportunity to give up.
What does that look like, a prime, an Australian-owned prime? Where from where you are now to where you need to be?
So it comes down to, and this is an argument here since I've been back in Australia the last few months. There's a lot of discussion around sovereign, but I don't think we're getting to the heart of it. Sovereignty is around control, and so we are part of an alliance.
So can you explain that? Sorry, sovereignty is around control. Explain what you mean by that.
So control of your future, your supply chain, your IP, what it is that you do, and how you react. If I look at sovereignty from a defence perspective, we have lots of foreign-owned primes here in Australia. In fact, all of them are foreign-owned primes. Ultimately, their parent company they decide where they invest. If they want to put research and development, money invest in Australia, that's up to the parent company. You're developing IP, which is typically owned by the parent. The parent can decide where they put that IP.
Yep.
And when it comes to defence, that product. So sovereignty is about having the ability to actually, if the government was to say, well, we're on our own now, we need to have everything back here in Australia, this is what we need to operate and to generate, locally or nationally, then we want to have some control over that. That isn't there. Yeah, there's the alliance, and we always know we've got very strong, with the US and the UK, and we believe we can rely on that. But I've said this before in some other forums that if push comes to shove, and say for the US, for example, is fighting a war on multiple fronts, it's very difficult for them to continue to provide that support to us if we or another nation is under attack as well.
Correct.
So it's really important to understand what it is that you have, what you need, and therefore have control over it. And so an Australian prime and owned and operated would mean that the Australian government can, through a sense of, pride, you'd expect that you'd do that. And I'm sure the other entities here in Australia as well, being foreign owned, will still do what they can, for the nation. But the true control comes from actually being Australian owned and operated, and the Australian government saying, okay, well, we know you operate in this country or this country, but we need you to focus on our needs first. And that's a worst case scenario, but that's what you get with true sovereign, sovereignty, true sovereign control. And I'll give you one example. So Oberon class submarines, the Australian Navy was operating those. Falklands War came about. All the supply, all the needs went back to the Royal Navy. They were operating the same class of boat, and Australia was left without that support. Yeah, because we had no sovereignty. We didn't have that control over our submarine force.
Yeah, if your older cousin is in trouble, who you're relying on, and you need to be able to take care of yourself. Put the big boy pants on, so to speak.
Exactly.
So what does that mean from, I think the question that was coming to my mind when you were talking there, is Nova then in line for that? Are they probably like the cab off the rank that is the most obvious choice, or is there an amalgamation, or what does that look like?
And there's a number of ways of getting there. We can grow there, to be a particular size. We have a saying that we're small enough to care, but big enough to matter. So in other words, we care about our employees, but we're also large enough that the government, defence, etc., they understand what it is that Nova can do for the nation. But that's around our services, particularly around the test and evaluation, our expertise there. That's what we're known for. But I think to be a true prime, then we'll need to go into the next level up, which is around having that integration ability or some piece of the pie which is integral to actually providing interoperability between different products, different systems, different offers to provide a capability. Yeah. And that can be done. We may do that through acquisition of a number of other companies, a joint venture. And if we're truly Australian, then obviously they'd have to be with Australian companies. But that would be the aim ultimately. That's what I'd like to see before I retire from the workforce.
How does it work? Is it just when does it become, yes, Nova are a prime now? When does that get decided? Excuse the ignorance on the question. I don't know how it works.
No, it's a good question. Yeah. If you look at the size of it, we're bigger than some of the foreign-owned primes now in terms of personnel, but we're not recognised as a prime. I think the prime is when the government says, right, you're providing a particular service or offering that is ours, that we need to have that control over, and which is now and they're referring other companies to you. Yeah, okay. So they're saying, well, you need to go and talk to Nova because they provide that capability for us. So that's the recognition of what a prime status is. Is
the government near that position? Do they see the same and and share the same vision as Nova does?
I think that comes down to me communicating that, which is, talking with the government and educating the government around what it is that we're trying to do, from a Nova perspective. But there's still a number of steps that we have to take. Remember what I said before, that's a goal, that's an aim.
Yep.
How do we get there?
Yep.
That's something that we need to work through, and we need to communicate that as well with our customer.
I remember when I was in your office the last couple of weeks, I love the timeline on the wall. It would be so great to see a timeline of become a prime. I think that'll be, how far away do you think that is?
It's hard to sort of put a figure or a number on it, but I'd say I'd like to see within the next sort of 3 to 5 years that we have the potential to actually do that.
I am conscious of your time, so I want to just ask a few questions around your thoughts on Australia and the defence that we take as a country before we close and wrap up. What are your thoughts on the future of the defence industry here in Australia, and ultimately, when we talk about sovereignty, is Australia safe right now, and as it currently stands?
I'll answer the second question first, which is, are we safe? Yes. I mean, we have our partners, with the other nations that we interoperate with. I mean, obviously there's the diplomacy, route first, but from a physical, I don't feel that we have we have an emerging threat, but not something that we're going to be threatened, which is, if something was to happen tomorrow, that we wouldn't feel safe, or we shouldn't feel safe. We have that alliance, we have the partners there, and we have a fantastic capability in our own ADF as well. So yes, I feel safe, but it's about making sure that we have a deterrent. And that's, a lot of people, it was always described as an insurance policy, having a defence force. And I think that's what's kept Russia from invading other nations, is because they have a defence force. They have a deterrent. That's why Poland's gone to 6% of GDP. You need to build up your defence industry, your defence force, and then you have that that security and the deterrent to stop others as well. So that's the warning, so to speak. So, and I believe we have that, but it's something that we need to actually grow, because the threats as they emerge are getting bigger and there's more of them.
I might sound like the most ignorant person with this next question, but it somewhat seems ludicrous to me that we are creating defence mechanisms to defend against each other.
Sounds like a Hollow Man episode, doesn't it? Yeah. Who are we protecting ourselves from?
It just blows my mind that we as human beings, as a species, have come so far, done so much, created so much, invented so much, figured out a way to create meaning in life, to be able to think things into existence, and yet still want to tear that down because of ego or whatever other stupid reason.
It comes down to human nature, though, doesn't it? At
Yeah.
the end of the day, there are people out there are governments out there who don't think the same way that we do. They don't operate in the same framework and the same understandings that we have. So you're always, we're always going to have that threat. There's always somebody who wants to take something from somebody, that they feel the need, that they have a greater desire than we do. So it's something that's always been there and is unfortunately never going to go away.
We hope. I think, to use a really silly example, and it has to be silly for it to actually show anyway, I'm just going to say it. If an alien ship poked its head out of the sky right now and started shooting at us, right?
Yeah.
And it was shooting in the direction of Ukraine and Russia, I would almost be certain that Ukraine and Russia would look at each other and go, all right, how do we defeat these guys?
Common enemy.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
And so that's why for some reason, it just doesn't sit well with me. I know it doesn't sit well with anyone, and you have to do it because we have to protect, and it'd be silly not to, because then there's always going to be some idiot that tries to take over everything. But I struggle with the idea that we are here on this beautiful planet and we're not looking bigger and outward as opposed to looking at our brother next door.
But you can say the same, I suppose, about the environment too. If you look at climate change, they're the deniers. But the reality is we are destroying our own environment just from our day-to-day practices.
Yeah.
So we find it difficult to unite around that aspect which is our own survival, as a species.
Yeah.
And as I said before, from a war perspective, warfare is one of the oldest, professions or issues that we've had to face.
Yeah.
And I'm a realist. It's always going to be there.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely obsessed with the idea of it all. I've read probably every war strategy book that you can get your hands on. I do genuinely enjoy the readings and the stories that come from it, but the idea of itself of fighting with your own people just throws me off a bit. Anyway, enough about that. I've had my little rant. You've been quoted to say though that we need to prepare for the unexpected. What does that look like? How do you prepare for something, and what does the unexpected look like in your eyes and for Australia?
I think we've just got to look at what's happened just recently in terms of Ukraine.
Yeah.
So Ukraine was invaded. International community came together to supply armament, not physical force in terms of providing troops on the ground, but armaments to assist Ukraine to defend themselves. I think there was a sudden realisation that we don't have the stockpiles that people thought we had, or maybe community thought we had. Governments most likely probably knew we didn't have those stockpiles. But when they pulled it all together, they thought, we don't have enough, let's just make more. We can produce more. How hard's that? Well, it's really, really difficult because, you're looking at supply chains that maybe existed, during World War II and then afterwards, and then, they changed and they went from building tanks to building cars or, going into something else completely different. And a lot of organisations don't survive. So supply chains weren't there. And it meant actually to provide a capability to restock, then you need to reinvigorate the whole industry. And at the same time that you're trying to do that, everybody else wants to do it as well. And a lot of our supply chains are global, and therefore the need or the desire, the want for their product is coming from, all around them, from numerous customers. So then they have to prioritise, and then therefore we might not get exactly what we want. So that's why I bring it back to control. We need to understand what do we need in terms of our stockpiles to prepare to defend ourselves, whether it's weeks, months or years. We need to actually understand what's that scenario, what do we need to do that. Because, and I heard it mentioned just recently, just-in-time management, it doesn't work in defence.
No.
And that's one lesson we need to learn here as well, is that we need those stockpiles. Even if things dissipate and we go back to a peaceful environment, if we don't learn from this and have those stockpiles and have those, those armaments ready just in case, then we're going to find ourselves as Ukraine has. Again,
I'm going to ask another ignorant question. If we are building these new submarines at the moment to protect ourselves against our neighbours, so to speak, the turnaround time for these things is 8-10 years or however long it's going to take to build them. Can't the enemy just, if I know that and I'm sitting here in this podcast room, can't the enemy just go, we'll attack them in 5 years' time? Like, I don't understand how it works. And again, like I said, it's an ignorant question, but isn't intelligence just to say, we'll attack them just before they're ready, while they're still vulnerable?
Well, the good thing is it's not like we have nothing in between.
Yeah, okay.
We have an existing capability. We continue to maintain, sustain, and we're now, if I look at what we've been doing with our Anzac frigates, we've been upgrading those, extending their life and extending their capability. Submarines, there's life of type extension on the Collins class as well. So that bridge is always going to be there between the time between now and when we acquire the new capability, or we have that and we're using that. So there is no gap there.
Yeah, okay.
And we've got to make sure
so it's not like
there
we're
is
at
no
zero.
gap.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
So we've got to make sure that we fulfil that all the time.
Very good. Well answered. In your notes, because before every podcast we send out just a quick questionnaire, and one of your notes that you wrote back in response to one of our questions was that Australia needed to be more resilient. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's supply chain resilience, that's one, but I think it's just that understanding from a community perspective. Again, being in Europe and living in Sweden had national service. They were prepared. Everything was prepared in terms of their defence posture to defeat Russia. and they were quite open about that. That's who the enemy was.
Yep.
And that's the way kids were brought up in schools. When something goes off in a disaster, this is where you go. These are the safe rooms. People in the general environment, in society, knew, they had this like a national guard, so to speak, as well as the professional defence force. But everyone was geared towards that, so very resilient. They stopped doing national service probably about 15 years ago, 10 or 15 years ago. They brought that back in again. In fact, the younger generation, because it's different when the war's on your doorstep. It's just over the fence. So they feel and sense the real threat and the potential of what could happen there in Europe, particularly on their borders. And so there's a real desire from the society now to actually, well, one is, by joining NATO for a start, they're trying to seek that assurance around security. But moving there or changing their philosophy around what's important to them from an expenditure perspective. Defence was always, it was more around the environment, for example. It was in other areas. Defence was, I wouldn't say it's a bad word, in Swedish society, but it was one of those things where it wasn't a high priority.
Yeah.
That's changed. They're far more, they're going back to that resilience, which is understanding what do we need to protect ourselves, our nation, and how do we build that up. And so there's a general discourse or dialogue in Sweden, and it's in the papers, it's on TV all the time, it's talked about. People understand why they're spending money on defence, whether they use it or it's their deterrence, that insurance policy. There is that discussion happening now. And I think that's where we feel, and geographically we're a long, long way away from an adversary, and where the threat is. But it's about making sure that from a societal perspective, and government's released a national defence strategy, and the important thing to recognise it is national, and it's not just the Department of Defence. It's all departments. It's all of society. We need to understand, what is the threat to us? What have we got to do? Why are we spending money on defence? Because I've heard people say, why are we buying these submarines? Why are we putting this money in for the fighter program, for example? It's not really important. We've got other things to worry about. We do. We need to actually invest in numerous areas, but we also need this deterrence.
Yeah. We need to figure out how to protect ourselves first before we can do anything else. Otherwise,
if you can't protect yourself, you can't help others.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, exactly. It's as you were speaking there, I had never thought about it that way. I was thinking about, over the years as they've evolved, and we've come from, with no electricity and whatnot, the communities, the tribes would grow their young in ways in which they would learn how to protect first, and so that they would protect the tribe first amongst anything else, and that just goes back to what you're saying about Australia is. And what Sweden doing? How do we educate people? Because if there was a war to break out, my kids would be like, "What's this? What does this mean? I thought this was only in movies, right?" Like it's the idea of it actually being real is something that I think needs to be brought to the forefront, which is a good point. One last question before we jump into some closing thoughts, and I can't go through a podcast without asking you about AI and the role that you think it'll play in the industry, the defence industry.
Yeah, we're already seeing it now, to be honest. Yeah. We're using AI in the way we write software, some of the programs that we use now to develop the products and the offers. I think it's going to be there I still believe that AI in defence will be around decision support. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's going to be in the space where we rely on AI to take the decision for us. Mm. I think ultimately it still comes down to, if that's the last situation where, you've got a lot of missiles coming in and there's too many for the human brain or somebody in a command centre to say, okay, well, that one first, then that, then that, then that. And we already use those sorts of algorithms now. Yep. But we never really sit ourselves in full autonomous mode and let the system do everything for us.
Protect it,
Yeah, I think we're always going to have ultimately somebody in the loop, somebody saying, okay, what are my options? AI will assist us to generate those options much faster, and we'll get used to actually making decisions based on the information that's presented to us, as long as we trust the artificial intelligence there. But I still feel that there's still a person in the loop.
Yeah. Very good. Rightio. So just some closing thoughts before we go into some quick fire questions. If you had to encapsulate your journey, your personal journey in one message, what would it be?
I think probably take the opportunity. When the opportunity is presented, noting that there's going to be some discomfort and there's going to be some hardship there, take the opportunity and go for it. I mean, I've been very, very lucky, very supportive family to do what I've done. But ultimately, if the opportunity is presented, even if you don't have all the answers, you don't feel confident, that you're the right person, give it a go.
Great. And outside of that, giving it a go, is there any advice that you would give to young emerging leaders? What, especially from a behavioural point of view, what would they need to do in order to be successful as a leader and grow within their ranks?
Look, listen and learn. That's always what we teach the kids. Yeah. You got to look at the environment, look what's going on around you. You got to listen. Don't act first. Listen to what's going on. Learn from that and then form your judgment and take the opportunities as they come. But it's about taking all the various environmental feeds in. Be it auditory or visual, whatever.
When you say don't act first, what do you mean by that? Do you mean don't act on an emotional whim? Yeah.
So you've got to actually take into consideration before you take a decision is, have you assessed the available information in the available time frame that you have, rather than say, okay, if I've got a week to make a decision, I'm not going to take it on the first day. If I've got a couple of minutes, then I'll take as much information as I can and then take a decision. But don't just do it just for the sake of it.
It's a good point. I'm going to just stray offside just for 1 minute. One thing that I struggle with is that information's given to me that is clear as day, that is not in line with what we need to do or where we need to go or the targets we're trying to meet or however it might be. And I instantly make this, I seek the information, I understand the information, and then there's this instant gut-wrenching feeling that goes on, which is like, oh shit, this is going to change a lot. I'm definitely trying to get better at going, okay, how do I live with that gut-wrenching information before I then act on it? But Daniel of the past was absolutely like, information come in, emotion come out. How do you manage that situation?
It's trying to rationalise it, I suppose. It's understanding, there's not everything is good in terms of the feedback that you get. Not everything is going to work out well. But you've got to just rationalise the fact that why are you taking those decisions? Why are you doing what you're doing? And if it's for the greater good, it's for the organisation, the team to succeed, then you need to do that, even though it is uncomfortable for you as an individual or personally, or uncomfortable for some other people as well. But if the greater good's going to succeed because of that, then again, you rationalise that in your own head, which is, well, this is for the team.
Yeah, I love it. Rightio. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes to get through these quick fire questions. What are you reading right now?
It's Mawson. Here's the book I've been reading. And so one of the things I like to read about is adversary, challenge, adventure.
Yep.
And one of my favourite authors is because he does it all the time is Ranulph Fiennes. He's just gone around the world at 80. I think he's in his early 80s now. Just phenomenal as an explorer. What he's been doing. So he's written a book on Mawson, which is good, and Shackleton as well. Sorry.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, so that's quite good.
Very good. Is there any sort of development book, strategy book, or anything like that sort of stands out from the crowd? That maybe the one that you've gifted the most, or
I'm not a great believer in some of these. I read The Naked CEO. I can't remember his name now. The author.
What's his name?
Alex. I don't know his name.
The Naked CEO. Sorry, I'm thinking. Is that the same guy who wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team? No,
not sure.
Different one.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But I read that and I looked at it and I thought, well, I didn't find it as a developmental book anyway. I looked and I said, well, that's just obvious.
Yeah.
Anybody could tell you that.
Yeah.
If I could, give that to my son or daughter, they go, yeah, of course.
Oh, a lot of the books these days are
a
lot of the books these days are glorified business cards, aren't they? Really,
Yeah.
It's someone who's done a bit of. But is there anything foundational that takes you back, or even a strategic war book or something like that actually?
Again, it comes back to more those. It's almost a autobiographical.
Yeah.
Those individuals that have suffered through adversity to achieve an aim. That's what drives me. That's why I still like doing those endurance events. because of the fact you look at it, a lot of the time it's mental.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah,
It's the mental challenge.
Have you read the David Goggins book?
No, I haven't. No.
Oh, you would love that. He's a Navy SEAL that becomes ultramarathon. His book's unbelievable. If you want to go through the adversity and the mental toughness piece, then the David Goggins book is a good one. What's one lesson that's taken you the longest to learn?
I think it's around that you don't have to produce all the answers. Sometimes people just want to vent.
Yeah.
They just want to actually use you as a sounding board. They don't necessarily want an answer. And I think sometimes I've been too quick to look at it and go, well, that's easy. Just do this.
Yeah.
Why don't you choose that over that? They're not really after an answer. They just want to vent.
Yeah.
So, I think it's taken me a while to learn, which
Thinking
is just listen and let them have their say.
Yeah, I'm probably in the same boat with you there. If you could have coffee with one current or historical figure, who would it be?
Billy Connolly. I mean, I love Billy's, comedy, his humour, and he's just such a fantastic storyteller.
Yeah.
I went and saw him live a long time ago now, it's probably 15, 20 years ago with my father, and it's just incredible the way he'd tell a story. He'd go off on his tangent, and then 20 minutes later, come right back to that point and do something else.
Yeah.
It's just, phenomenal.
With energy as well.
With energy, absolutely.
What's some of the best advice you've ever received?
Bad news is like bad wine. It doesn't get any better with age. So, if something's going the wrong way, you got to tell people sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I like that. What's one habit that holds you back the most?
This is not from a professional perspective, but more personal, which is, as I said, I like to do those endurance challenges. Yeah. I sign up for them, and I have every intent to actually put the training in and do everything, but I always leave it to the last minute.
Yeah.
I ran a marathon with 6 weeks training. I've done numerous events where I put it in at the last minute, and when I finish that event, I say, I'm never going to do that again. I'm going to train next time, and I never do.
And same thing comes back, and then you probably can't walk for weeks after. What's one of your biggest pet peeves? Like, what pisses you off the most?
Cruelty.
Yeah.
Whether that's, people being, bullying or domestic violence or, putting someone else down, and in particular animal cruelty. It really gets my blood boiling. People who actually take advantage of others. So cruelty.
Yep. If you could pay someone to do one of your chores, which one would it be?
Iron my shirts.
Yeah, the worst. I'm with you on that.
Every day.
What's one word that you absolutely hate?
Can't.
Yeah, no such word. What's the first thing that you would do if you became invisible?
That's a good question. Attending sporting events, maybe.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I used to live not far away from VFL Park in Melbourne. So mates and I, because we were young, we were small, we could sneak in. And we could get under the members stand. Yeah. We could get through these bars. So now, obviously, I can't at this.
Yeah, it's good.
A little bit bigger than I used to be. So
Super Bowl,
NBA, like that.
NBA championship.
Get into all the top events.
I love that. What's the most useless talent that you have?
My wife has probably said this, which is my domestic deafness.
Yes. No, didn't hear that. Yeah.
Exactly.
What?
No, that's why I'm still married to. I'm happy.
And my favourite joke of the whole podcast, what's your best dad joke?
Why did the Scarecrow win an award?
Why did the Scarecrow win an award?
Because he was outstanding in his field.
Very good. Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time today, Dean. It's been an absolute pleasure listening to your story and your journey, and it's really exciting that Australia's got a good one back in there, and you're helping to what hopefully will become Australia's first prime with Nova Systems. So, I guess from speaking on behalf of everyone, what you guys are doing and providing defence for this nation, thank you, and thank you to everyone else who's out there and working in that field as well.
No worries. Thank you very much, Daniel.
No worries, mate. Where can people get in contact with you if they want to?
LinkedIn's probably the easiest.
Yep. Yeah. Excellent. Very good. And that's it from us. We'll catch you next time.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the podcast all. You can check out the show notes if there was anything of interest to you and find out more about us at SynergyIQ.com.au. I am going to ask, though, if you did like the podcast, it would absolutely mean the world to me if you could subscribe, rate, and review. And if you didn't like it, that's all right too. There's no need to do anything. Take care, guys. All the best.